My name is Zara Mills, and today I'll be doing a presentation on a piece of research that was part of my postgraduate studies and Masters of Mental Health Nursing. I am a registered nurse who currently works on a mental health inpatient unit within the Public Health Services of Sydney, Australia. I have been a nurse for over 10 years, with the majority of my experience within the public mental health services. I'm currently preparing a thesis proposal focusing on nursing leadership and feminism. The research being presented today is an integrative literature review which focuses on how feminist theory has been applied by nurse researchers. The title of the research is How Has Feminist Theory Been Applied to Nursing Research? An Integrative Literature Review. The Triple Impact Report published in 2016 declared everyone globally should have access to healthcare. The report identified this cannot be achieved without strengthening and investing in nursing, nurse leaders and nursing leadership. Nursing remains a woman-dominated profession and susceptible to not just gender inequalities, also social inequalities. As a result, physicians, for example, are often favoured over nurses in terms of leadership positions, despite no formal undergraduate training in leadership. Susceptible to the patriarchal figures and systems in healthcare, nursing remains an oppressed group within the healthcare system. With this in mind, some of the characteristics of nursing resonate with the primary principles of feminist theory and could potentially benefit nursing as a profession. Broadly, feminists believe in the social, politically and economical equality of people. Equality includes the religious, cultural, social positioning and gender of people. For the purposes of this research, a sociological stance as opposed to biological would be used, meaning woman and man would be used as opposed to female and male. This review will consider the application of feminist theory and whether the core principles and underpinnings of feminist theory have been applied to nursing research studies that state its use in their study designs. Nurse researchers are considered a guide for nurses and as having an advanced knowledge base, particularly around theoretical frameworks. The rationale for using nurse researchers is based on the idea they are at the forefront of nursing education and its delivery to nurses. It is challenging to anticipate nurses will have a clear appreciation of the contribution and benefits of feminist theory if nurse researchers do not show a clear understanding themselves. It is important to note there are several types and interpretations of feminist theory. These include Black feminist theory, intersectional feminist theory, and standpoint feminist theory, amongst so many others. This review will focus on feminist theory, including others will be beyond the scope of this review. To undertake this review, a framework by Whitmore and Naffel was used. The review was conducted in April 2018 with no limitation to years of publication. This was done with consideration to the first, second, third and fourth feminist movements. In addition to this, each of these movements occurred at various times across the globe. A systematic search of 4 databases was conducted: CINAHL, Scopus, PsycInfo and PubMed. Keywords were used: nurse, feminist theory and research. Primary studies were only included in this review. Inclusion criteria were primary studies which involved either nurses as participants or researchers. Commentaries, editorials were not included. Exclusion criteria included any studies linked with midwives, allied health or physicians, or if feminist theory was not specified. Results that identified their researchers using either a feminist framework, a feminist approach, or feminism as a, quote, conceptual framework were reviewed for inclusion. A feminist 8-stage criteria developed by Bernard was applied to identify studies for inclusion. Studies were analysed and manually colour-coded for their applicability to each criteria. This back-and-forth approach allowed for themes to be identified. Results. The 4 databases produced 1,057 results. In addition to this, a further 9 results were identified from a manual search. Altogether, 1,066 results were the total amount of results identified. 18 duplicates were removed, leaving 1,046 records screened. The remaining records were screened and reviewed by title and abstract. Following this, 1,019 were excluded, leaving 27 full-text publications read for possible inclusion. After this, 15 further studies were removed. 12 studies were reviewed using the CASP, and further 3 were then removed. In total, 9 studies were included in this review. All studies were from 1998 to 2018. The studies included were from Thailand, Sweden, New Zealand, USA, and Australia. A broad range of cultures included Asia, Hispanic, women of colour, European were identified by the study authors. Of the studies, 87.5%, 7 studies were applied 4 or less of the Bernard criteria. 1 study fulfilled 6 of the 8 criteria and 1 study fulfilled 1 of the criteria. Discussion and themes. 3 themes were identified in this review. The themes identified were methodological approach with women, women's unique experiences, and in women's words. Interactions between women. This looked at the use of open-ended questions so that women could share their stories and experiences. 5 studies initiated with broad open-ended questions, allowing and encouraging women to share their experiences. 1 study did not disclose whether data was shared with women at any stage of the research process. Non-hierarchical relations between women. This interaction between both women was partially achieved in some studies. In other studies, subtle forms of hierarchy were observed in favour of the women undertaking the research. In 1 study, a woman described herself as holding the position of researcher, participant, and academic. Expression of feelings. Respect for the experiences of women was conveyed by use of quotes. 2 studies supported women to talk freely and share their unique experiences, although 3 studies did not achieve this. Concern for values. In 1 study, 2 authors interpreted observer notes independently before authors reached a consensus on themes and concepts. 2 studies provided women the opportunity to read their transcripts prior to analysis beginning. Inequality. None of the studies explicitly detailed whether the purpose was to research on women or for women. This is one of the key tenets of feminist theory. Feminist research is done with women and for women. 1 study identified how women's lives changed after the birth of their baby, however the man caregivers' lives remained relatively unchanged. Safety. Safety concerns were raised in 6 studies. These concerns ranged from cultural safety, physical safety, and professional accountability with nursing and sexual health safety. Power. Power is identified between nurses and women, and secondly, power observes as an undercurrent within the studies themselves between both groups of women. One of the more significant findings of this review is just 1 author identified themselves as immersing themselves into developing a relationship with women before initiating the research. She identified herself, her gender, her sexuality, cultural background, and her occupation experience. In women's words. From this review, it is evident if language is used incorrectly, it can potentially compromise the beliefs of feminist theory and how this is used in research. Women included in the studies were mostly commonly referred to as participants. 1 study explored the experiences of young women expectant mothers and suggested women, quote, work cooperatively and focus on, quote, their anger management. Another study suggested women who insist on safe sex with their husbands are at risk of disrupting their marriage. None of the studies were identified as using what feminists would consider sexist language. Limitations and conclusion. Despite an analysis built between feminist theory and nursing, no literature reviews were sourced examining the use of feminist theory and nursing to compare these results to. These findings from this review suggest a decline in feminist theory since Bernard's initial findings in 1984. Caution is raised to the sample size. Bernard's original work included 90 nursing research reports in comparison to the 9 studies included in this review. It is possible some studies were eliminated due to the search terms used in this review. Studies may have used feminist theory, or it was not clearly or explicitly identified by the study author during the review of papers. 1 study also used Foucault theory, meaning feminist theory could have been stronger than was actually identified in this review. Overall, this review identifies there's room for nurse researchers to improve their understanding of the application of feminist theory and feminist methodology in their research. Relevance to clinical practice. Globally, nursing remains a woman-dominated profession and the largest healthcare discipline within the health workforce. Many of the principles of feminist theory can be applied to nursing, not only because it is a woman-dominated profession, but also because feminist theory challenges the structures and barriers nurses encounter whilst working both within wide and complex health systems and institutions. If nurse researchers are unclear of the application and use of feminist theory, it is very challenging to anticipate nurses will have a clear appreciation of its contribution and benefits towards a profession. Feminists support women's personal experiences that encourage social and political change to the benefit of people gaining equality and disrupting the status quo. In the words of the second word of feminism, the personal is political. I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you for listening and being given the opportunity to present this review at the Nightingale 2020 virtual conference. I've included my contact details if needed and references available upon request. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Vasiliki Petahardis for her help and support in creating this review into a manuscript, Jo River for her advice and support with my thesis proposal, and Mary Kirella and Jill White for sharing the knowledge and expertise and support to date. Thank you.